Hey everybody, welcome back to Great Mondays Radio. Today, Erin Swartout, who is an organizational psychologist that focuses on talent and organizational effectiveness, has a long history of helping organizations. uh, well, I would say go through. You use the term journey, and I loved this idea that you brought up, which is how you go about actually affecting the kind of change and the kind of change at scale. And most people talk about leadership development as I have a leadership coach, but you have a unique perspective, which I wanted to get into the leadership at scale. So, Erin Swartout, thank you so much for coming on Great Mondays Radio.
Thanks, Josh. Excited to be here on Great Mondays.
Yeah, absolutely. So, can you tell us a little bit about kind of your history, how you got here? You've worked for some major companies as an organizational psychologist. I think it helps our listeners understand sort of your context, where you're coming from, before we dive into the nitty-gritty here.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like you said, I'm grounded in IO psychology, which is really a research practitioner model. And I got a master's in IO, have been steeped with a lot of the PhDers, and actually spent the first 10 years of my career working in more of a boutique consulting firm, mostly of IOs,
Hmm.
doing custom consulting across the talent management space, performance management, leadership development, org effectiveness. Did a stint as an HR business partner in the midst there at Marriott's corporate global headquarters. Amazing group of people and phenomenal organization.
Hmm.
Um, and then shifted. So the last 10 years, I've really been internal, doing more kind of internal consulting, leading talent and org development areas for the organization. So came back to my hometown in Michigan and worked for the Kellogg Company, which is based here in Michigan. And
Yep.
then after that, I spent about 7 years leading talent and org development for Masco Corporation. And we sometimes say you might not know their brand, but you know their brands because they hopefully are
Right.
home products in your home. So think Behr Paint, Delta Faucet Company, Hansgrohe, Watkins Wellness. So a really amazing organization.
Hmm.
And then was wanted to go back to my roots a little bit of being more entrepreneurial and consulting, and so have started my own independent firm last year called Intersections Consulting Group, to be able to partner with different types of organizations and, to your point, bring a lot of these learnings that we've had, myself and with other partners, to more people.
I'm not from that org psych world. When you talked about you got a master's in IO psychology, organizational psychology, do they in the curriculum, do they talk about culture when you got your like, is that something that's brought up or is it kind of unsaid? And this is just a personal curiosity. Like, did you have a whole class on culture or is it like not at all or somewhere in the middle?
I mean, I think all of us, founders of culture like Ed Schein
Yep.
and, people in this space were certainly exposed to a lot of the literature. Sometimes it gets a little more nerdy. People talk about you read and learn a difference about culture versus climate,
Yep.
and what can kind of predict those different things. So yeah, there's a lot of different opportunities to kind of dig in really to the things that predict culture,
Okay. All
so
right. Good.
predict high performance.
That was just a little detour that I
Yeah.
realized I had you to could ask for. It's like I never did that. So, okay, fantastic. So, when we were talking before we started recording, you were discussing, and you brought up this idea of leadership at scale. Like usually, as I said in the intro, leadership development is thought of as a one-on-one, but you have an experience and a perspective that actually, I think he said can elevate an entire team by approaching leadership development at scale or across many folks. Can you talk a little bit about that and share a little some stories around how that came to be?
Absolutely. I mean, I think you're hearing more and more about the democratization of leadership development at scale. Traditionally, and these things, as I frame some of this, it's both. It's not like, oh, we need to do this big from to switch and we need to kill all current leadership development programs and one-on-one coaching. Like that's sort of table stakes.
Okay.
And most programming is a bit more focused on the individual, right? You take someone out of work, they go to an amazing program with other people as part of the organization, and then you put them back in work. And then they kind of go back to their team and their context, and they have all these new insights, new frameworks, new ways of working, but their team and everyone that they interact with didn't get those things.
Mm.
So it's really hard for them to integrate those insights into the flow of their work because other people didn't get the same thing.
Right. And
Uh,
it's hard to change the habits of yourself if your system doesn't
right.
change.
Exactly.
You're using a let's say it requires a lot more energy to make that
100%.
change,
I mean,
right?
you can change your individual habits, but this is whether we're talking about leadership development at scale, scaling team performance, or culture,
Hmm.
it's really about shifting the system and
Yes.
thinking about everything as a
Systemic
system.
change.
And there's these different ways that you can nudge the system at all the different levels, individual, team, and organization that really unlock something new. So I sometimes call like culture, I'm always like, ooh, I don't always use the big C word.
Yeah.
Because when you lead with the big C, it's a lot for people. You get into this
That's
morass of trying to define what it is. And it's like, let's just get after it.
yeah.
Let's get after nudging these many elements in the system to a new place and kind of just helping with evolution
Hmm.
rather than like a destination. And I just think leadership, I mean, this isn't surprising, especially in the current state, as long as we still have hierarchies and leaders and roles, and AI might disrupt all of that. And some people are testing that stuff.
Yep.
But as long as we do have those roles and that hierarchy and that structure, um, getting leaders to develop and think about development as one part of their job, as part of how their teams work, and doing it collectively as a collective group, we've just seen be really impactful.
Mm.
And so, I can get into some maybe examples of how we
Yeah.
tried to bring it to life. I think one, it starts with more doing than talking about it,
Okay. I love that.
which is kind of in a few different ways. So, as the designer or the center of excellence or the team that's trying to bring these interventions to an organization, we sometimes can fall in our own traps of trying to design the perfect thing, building 3 5 year roadmaps
Yeah.
versus where is the best place to start? Let's do some test and learn. Let's see what resonates and let's build on it from there. Um, Along with getting leaders to just do things and not teach them everything. And so,
Theory
one of the
versus
most,
practice.
yeah, well, and experience it before we tell them what it is.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Okay.
So, for example, instead of doing a long workshop up front on psychological safety and having it be very cognitive and sort of abstract,
Yeah.
have leaders both in intact teams or in larger settings practice vulnerability by just telling someone a time that you grew the most, telling someone like what you're not great at, telling someone what you're struggling with, giving them the agency because we know vulnerability doesn't work the same for everyone, especially depending on what background you come from. But
Absolutely.
first doing it, especially senior leaders doing it publicly. And then we say, okay, what did you think was going to happen? They usually are nervous.
Yes.
And then what happens is that actually people they don't look weak. They don't look um, not in control. They're people actually think they look stronger. And then we say, okay, now let's talk about what just happened.
Right. You're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Can I ask you about the like even being more specific? Like when you say getting a senior leader to do this answer vulnerable question in public.
Hmm.
What are we saying like, okay, at the next town hall, there's gonna be a Q&A and we're gonna ask you a question about, when you grew the most. Like what are we actually talking about here? Because I can imagine a lot of people that are listening right now are like, oh hell no, that's gonna I think that
Well,
my
I think
boss is not doing that.
you have to build up to certain things. I think ideally it just becomes normal, and that's really to me when you know something has shifted.
That's right. That's the goal.
One of the ways we found a huge opportunity where I worked at Masco was the top 150 in any organization, 150, 200, whatever your number is, right? They usually have summits, business conferences, and a lot of it is presentations, investors coming in and talking about the market, a big deep dive from the CFO on financials, and maybe some best practice sharing, and a speaker. And there's not a lot of doing, there's not a lot of experiencing, and there's limited development happening. But you have this huge opportunity to do leadership development at scale when
Hmm.
you bring these leaders together. And so this was how we launched a new leadership profile. We didn't tell everyone you're going to be measured on it. And this is a huge credit to the CEO and his team because they were willing to try some things I had
That's
not
right.
done before. And we said, hey, you're going to just do storytelling about these behaviors that you actually co-created. Like you created some of these. You're going to just talk about them to the audience. And before you talk about them, we introduced this concept called the backhand. So just again, using metaphors where like instead of calling it your gap or your opportunity area, everyone has a backhand. It's just we have
Oh, is
natural.
this like a tennis analogy?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Everybody has things that is not your natural go-to, but you still have to use it. And it probably is never going to go away, but you can still get better at it. And
Okay.
actually, everybody else knows what it is. So it's not really a secret.
Just because I haven't said it.
So we had them go talk to people about what their backhand was. And then our CEO on stage in front of 150 people told everybody what it was and what he learned from the feedback he got and how he needed some help to try to get better. And it's quite simple but hard to do.
Yeah, that's right. Just because it's simple doesn't mean it's easy.
And we built on those moments. We didn't call that vulnerability at the time. And then we just continued to build and build
Mm,
in different formats. But that's one example of doing it kind of at scale and really thinking about using business conferences, business forums, business strategy team meetings, business offsites. I'm always like, go where the work is. The work is where they are meeting together.
right.
And
Yeah.
infuse leadership development where the leaders are already doing the work. Um, and so that's been some of and especially when we've been able, and again, year after year, that business conference at Masco kind of evolved to really be an executive development forum where
Which
they're
is
doing
that's the win, right? Like
peer
that's
learning, cross network learning, wisdom of the crowd, less about experts telling you what you should be doing and then versus unlocking what's already there. Most
mm,
of them already know the answers. Or if there aren't answers to these big gnarly problems, which many times there's not, we have to create a conversation and help them have the right conversation to work on some of those really big complex challenges.
okay, let me ask you a question. So you critique my approach. I just did a big trust building session for a room full of senior attorneys inside of a
Well,
technology company.
okay.
And
I'm
it was
holding my biases about our lawyer friends.
well, we're gonna get to it immediately. It showed up very quickly. Um, so what I presented was a kind of a quick section up front about why trust is so important, right? So they know why they're in the room. And then one of the skills that I described was active listening. And then I
Hmm.
had them practice active listening. So, in your model, and we can talk about how successful or not that was, in your model, the way that you're actually talking about, let's just call it the like, just start doing it. Was that uh is how did that structure, how does that structure sound to you? Just from if I said like that's how I approached it. Did I kind of was I able to get to that point, or would you have done it a different way? I guess there's a lot of info here that you need, but just
I mean, yeah, exactly.
minimal.
I think there's a natural tension that my first inclination would have been to go with the way you approach things. And colleagues of mine, especially, really great colleague, his name's Nick Petrie. He's kind of an expert in this space of adult and leadership
Yeah,
development and vertical
yeah.
development and mindset shift. And he'll always be like, when we're designing something, like, can we give them a mini experience first?
First, so invert.
First, he would always want to do a little, and I'm usually sometimes like, but they need some context. And I think there's just a natural tension there, and there's no right
Okay.
answer. And it's
All
just,
right.
but I do think there's times where it's powerful before teaching a topic. And sometimes in the first 5 minutes, showing them that the experience is going to be different and getting them to have some type of emotional
Mm-hmm.
element
Mm-hmm.
really starts to get them engaged in the process in a different way. And everyone's sense making process is different.
Yeah.
So I think what you did was probably great. But this is another tool in the toolkit to just be like,
Yeah.
is there a way to bring them into a mini experience first?
First. Yeah.
Hear from them first before us teaching something.
Right. Well, I'm coming in, like trying to prove that this is valuable, right? So I'm like,
Yeah.
here's the reason, but
Oh,
I
right.
hear you. So the rejoinder is, um, I assume everybody's heard of active listening, and the whole premise of active listening is that you withhold judgment, or you don't judge, right? You just listen. And lawyers have been trained and are probably self-selecting because they're so good at judging what's right
Yeah.
and wrong.
Yeah.
And so it was really, I was like, this is a very simple, it's like exercise. I'm going to give you it was really, really hard for them. And a lot of them were like, wow, that was a big experiential difference. So that
Oh,
was so interesting to like, we went in knowing that they were skeptical, but I was like, oh shit. I didn't even think that it was like what they're naturally tending to do and what
well,
they're
and it's
actually.
not just lawyers. I
No,
mean,
yes, right,
kids
of
in
course.
particular, everyone, me and my relationship with my significant other, at times I think I'm a good listener, and it's like, no, really listening to learn and being curious versus listening to win or fix and just waiting to talk,
Yeah.
really different.
Win or fix. Yeah, right, exactly. Whew. All right. So can you I love I'm just learning so much from this conversation. Are there other examples that you have that you can share from your experience at Marriott, Kellogg, or Masco, thinking through or that sort of like leadership at scale, like bringing a group forward together?
Hmm. I think some of the work around team performance or team development, again, historically, there isn't really there's not like a process for that, or there's not
Hmm.
like a center of excellence that's like the owner typically of team development. It's like
Correct.
up
Yeah.
to the manager. Many times what this looks like is there's like, we feel like something's going on in the team. Let's go do an offsite. And there's some good stuff. Usually they get a consultant, and that's not a bad thing. I am a little bit more apt to try and have people not necessarily spend time talking about what color they are, styles, meaning
Hmm.
red, I'm blue, I'm green.
Hmm.
There's some value in some of these tools, but again, research evidence-based practices that we know work. It's like shift from styles to really core capabilities that will actually lift team performance. We know what some of them are. Psychological safety, one. These aren't sexy, like really complicated things either. team ways of working and team agreements and norms,
Hmm.
and debriefing and reflection practices. 15, 18 minutes can show a 20% lift in a team performance by having them we kind of call it get on the balcony,
Okay.
right? Get off the dance floor, really think about what is actually happening. How'd that meeting go? What'd we learn? What are you observing around how we're interacting around this decision? And baking that into the way the team actually operates. These things can unlock a new kind of performance. And when you're giving this to different teams across the organization, you really can scale something that is different than when a team is going off site once a year talking about different styles. Again, not saying it's bad, but when you think about 80-20 for impact, let's look at some of the evidence-based practices that we know work and really leverage our HR partners who are with these teams. They're in the meetings. And instead of relying maybe too much on external consultants, let's embed this capability with them and with their teams. And I think you can see some big shifts when
Hmm.
organizations start to prioritize those types of areas.
Okay, can we sort of repeat and or extend that list, the core capabilities that you just went through? I feel like you started, but then maybe it could have gone on. So psychological safety,
One,
one.
team ways of working, which are things like team norms, shared mental model. We have a charter, that's kind of in that sort of team ways of working or agreement bucket.
Yep.
The third I highlight is debriefing and reflection as a practice. And then there's different techniques for how you can do that. I mean, those are some of the three that I would call fundamentals that
Fundamentals, yeah.
are not that hard to help people understand how to do.
I do feel like what you're describing and your metaphor is great about getting off the dance floor and like just looking at it. The there's I just wrote a piece and we were the analogy is with sports teams, where sports teams actually practice all the time so that the game's really good. But in our current like delivery focused, we got to hit this number. Everybody gets like so stay on the dance floor, so
Yeah.
focused on game time
Yeah.
that they don't have the ability to stop and reflect. And there's just no time for it. And that is, have you, so one, validate or challenge that premise. And two, have you experienced that? And how do you um, make the case for actually taking a second to, learn how to back off?
Yeah, validating that, the practice, the reflection is key. And I think the sports analogy will tell they watch films and,
They watch
depending
themselves, right? Like,
themselves a lot. There is actually a lot of reflection going on when you're in sports. And so I think while I don't always love doing sports analogies, I think that is relevant. Um, I think this goes back to earlier in our conversation. Instead of us making the case, trying to find ways for them to feel it and experience it in small ways where they're like, wow, um, both individually and collectively. So giving people time in a team meeting to say, hey, take a couple seconds to jot a few things down as we're about to go around and talk about this topic. Just that little bit of time to do personal reflection and great. Okay, it doesn't even need to be called something big, but at the end of bake it into the agenda.
probably shouldn't be called something big.
No, it's just getting into the practice of integrating it into how you communicate about something. I mean, really, when I think we try to get leaders to, do it during the conversation, don't wait till then. Hey, what's happening right now?
Yeah. Yeah.
It feels like we're not on the same page.
Pause. Yeah.
Let's take a time out. I mean, these
Yeah.
are practices that as they start to experience that, I think they see the impact and then they're motivated to put this into practice more often.
Mm.
And the balcony metaphor, by the way, is not mine. fancy researchers and practitioners at Harvard, I think, came up with that.
That's fine. Yeah, it's I think that's really great. That goes right back to your let's just put it into practice. We don't have to like, hey, here it comes and we're gonna do it and it's a big thing. It's like, whoa, 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 let's just have this little experience here and let's do it together. And we're meeting anyways, and most of our meetings, are not very useful and not a good use of time. So might as well take some of that opportunity. It just feels it's a misperception, I think, or misconception about like we're just so busy. We're just so busy. That to me
Oh,
is right. Like
negative
that's
mindset about what you're doing, right? So it's whether you're being intentional to extract the development, extract the learning, just take a pause. And I think being able to see that, see the system, see how you're working, um, realize you are probably doing a lot of this intuitively. Like when people say I'm so busy, they are actually doing some of these things too. It's that you could get much more potential unlocked if we were more intentional about what we're doing.
it's a trade-off, isn't it? I mean, it feels like, well, I mean, just to be
Yeah.
uh, reductive about it, right? It's like, well, I can answer more emails right now, or right, I can go and learn something that's going to help me improve my, productivity in a year or whatever it might be. And it's just not balanced. I don't know. I'm in
Even
this.
that though, I think, we've seen we at Masco, for example, we really baked the development model has reflection at the center. So heat, diverse supportive networks, and reflection. And this is just a rhythm and a framework that has been
Yeah.
ingrained.
What's heat?
Sort of heat, you're really experiencing a bit of heat on the job. So, right,
Got
think,
it.
a little bit of extra pressure. I'm in a little bit over my head. I not exactly sure what this is how learning really happens. And this is kind of what comes from that vertical development space.
Yeah.
But these professionals that have sort of gone through some of these programs or experiences, one of their big ahas is like, I'm putting 10 minutes of reflection time on my calendar. These are not fancy tactics. Use your calendar. The calendar is a powerful tool. Use your reminders and little bits of those experiments or shifts change habits, and all of a sudden it just becomes how you do things.
That's great. I appreciate you helping me process some of these challenges that I'm observing as well. We've talked about a few sort of challenging moments already. Do you have like sort of your biggest challenge? Like what you are, I see you as this, experienced organizational psychologist. You have a lot of accrued wisdom. Where did you like for you, like what was one of the biggest challenges? It could have maybe not worked, but you learned something from it, or you were able to work through it. What was that, and what did you learn?
I should only do one, but I'm going to try and sneak in two. We'll see.
Okay.
One I think is context and readiness. So we sometimes think there's a right answer, a right model. And I did this big org design transformation project, and the model logically seemed right. The financials made sense, the approach made sense, but for that context and that organization, they weren't ready. They couldn't fully implement it. And I really think in some ways we maybe did more harm than good. And that was a massive learning lesson,
Mm,
especially if it gets to implementation and like it has really large scale downstream effects for a long time.
yeah.
So context, tailor to fit. There's no one size fit all. There's no right answer. You really have to kind of learn the organization and how to make sure they're ready and they can digest whatever you're trying to bring in.
Yeah.
I think that's one big one. And the other one is sort of connecting the dots for people. And so a lot of what we tried to do was not come out with a big brand at Masco on some of the things we were doing. this test and learn and like, let's just do it and learn from it. But if you do too much of that without helping people see the forest through the trees, they're maybe not connecting all the dots to the system. How all this stuff works together, these things are not operating as one-off
Mm,
interventions.
mm-hmm,
They're
mm-hmm.
all part of a system. And so finding real creative ways to help them connect the dots for themselves and ensure you're bringing people along so that they see that each test and learn is actually an evolution. It's about continuous improvement. It's connected to the bigger picture. I think those are two that I would highlight.
How do you create an environment that enables them to connect the dots when you're doing this kind of overtime test and learn?
I think we tried some things where, again, create many experiences that we put out pictures of different frameworks and different moments that they maybe would have experienced, and we laid it all out on a table. And we had them have conversations about what do you remember about some of these different pieces.
Mm, mm-hmm.
And it's like through that, it's like all these things are connected. We did
Oh,
some
mm-hmm.
experiences called It's All Connected.
Hit him over the head with a frying pan.
And but it helped, right? We were acknowledging that we hadn't always done that for them and that there isn't a perfect way. It's all a little bit messy, but we could do a better job of helping them connect some of the dots.
Yeah, and I think this goes back to my first question and how you were like, well, there's no one way. And because I think about it, or like, ooh, let's create a container so that everybody can understand
Yeah.
what we're talking about. And so um I guess what I'm thinking through and sort of ingesting here is like it doesn't have to be this whole launch and then you follow through with all the little tactics. It's like we can just start with the tactics and then introduce a little bit of the container and create that idea. Like I'm always thinking about the message and the frame and the,
I
like
think
what
that's
vessel
key
it's
though.
in.
Yeah. I think people sometimes get so locked on the frame though that you can't
Exactly.
change the frame as
That's my takeaway. That's my
yeah.
takeaway from our conversation. Because that's me. I'm gonna like I want to do right. Like I come from brand strategy, and that's what I
Yeah.
want to do is like I want to frame up the message and give it a position and make sure it's got a good visual. And right, you're like, ta-da! Look
Yeah.
at yeah, we did a thing, and it's like everybody's looking around like, okay, what's next?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's both.
Yeah, it both and yeah.
It's both and making sure people know this frame and this container is gonna change. But like this is how we're framing it up right now.
Hmm.
It's connected when you see that it might look a little different, or we might frame this up a little different next time.
Yeah. Great. Well, so as we wrap up here, I'd like to ask for a little bit of future advice that you might provide. There's learned a ton already, and I don't, and I'm, but maybe you still have a couple extra tidbits that you might want to share with our listeners. I'm not
We
going to leave any stone unturned with you, Aaron.
Well, this might open up another, and so I'll try to have this be how we wrap up. But I think in the space that we're in right now and how things, the change, the pace, the uncertainty, the complexity, AI, we were talking about how I come back to what's uniquely human. And really, all these things I was talking about at the
Mm,
center of all of this is just really powerful conversations that connect us to each other and allow us to do shared sense making to tackle some of these big challenges. And we all can do that. So I'm sort of framing this as like we all have the agency and maybe in the future, the responsibility to make conversation be our craft
mm,
and how we not just engage, but really listen with curiosity, really take on someone else's perspective. How do we see through their lens? How do we also challenge and bring some edge and tension to conversations to challenge people's assumptions? How do we make it feel reciprocal and not just in one-on-ones? This is conversations at scale. And that's uniquely human. And I think we can all every day try to get better at
Mm,
having conversations be our craft.
mm. Yeah. I feel like as humans, we're like, yeah, we're having conversations all the time. I'm great at it. But I think we can always do a lot better. This has been incredible, incredibly informative. Erin Swartout, thank you so much for coming on and sharing. You can learn more about Erin at her website, intersectioncg.com. Erin, thank you so much for coming on Great Mondays Radio. This has been just so informative.
Thanks, Josh. It was a great conversation. Appreciate it.